This is the Sean Hannity Show.
All right, thanks, Scott Shannon. Welcome aboard. Glad you're with us. Toll free. It's 800-941-SEAN if you want to be a part of the program. Now, we warned you what would happen with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. It's now happening. We were asking the question, well, who are the Libyan rebels that the administration, NATO, was supporting? It turns out they want Sharia law. Now, yesterday, we told you that since this, quote, big victory in Libya, now we have in Benghazi, the al-Qaeda flag is now proudly being displayed. Now, on top of that, we warned you about the missing 30,000 surface-to-air missiles. Well, it turns up that they now have showed up. 30,000 of them. And it points out that they are being used to attack Israel. Now, all over the Israeli papers are stories that Israel is considering. Sky News has one article out. Reuters has an article out, and others, the Jerusalem Post, that says that Israel is now debating fairly openly whether or not they will launch a preemptive attack on Iranian nuclear sites, considering that the Iranians have repeatedly said they want to wipe Israel off the map. Now, Iran has responded, saying they will cause serious damage to the U.S. and Israel should Israel strike the Islamic Republic's nuclear program. Quote, the Zionist regime's military attack against Iran would lead to heavy damages to the U.S. as well as to the Zionist regime, said Iran's chief of staff, their major general. Anyway, here to debate how to deal with these situations, we have Stanley Cohn is back with us, criminal defense attorney, and he is also the attorney for the political wing of Hamas, the terrorist group, and David Horowitz, a policy expert, author, and founder of the David Horowitz Freedom Center. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Hi, Sean. Hi, David. How are you?
How are your friends at Hamas doing these days, Stanley?
They seem to be doing very well. It seems to be a moment which is a crossroads in history. It seems to be more and more peace in the region, which obviously Netanyahu is uncomfortable with. The Arab Spring creates enormous problems for Israel and its friends because Netanyahu has always benefited from mayhem in the region, and peace promises to bring an end to his ridiculous regime.
You mean the launching of missiles into Israel and the attack along the Egyptian borders is, that's how you describe relative peace for Israel?
Listen, everyone spoke about how wonderful, when I was the one saying that this wasn't an Egyptian revolution, but actually a military coup, everyone thought I was crazy.
Well, I'm the one that said the Muslim Brotherhood would end up taking over, and I was right.
The generals are taking over. They're taking over. They're controlling everything. They're jailing members of the Muslim Brotherhood. They're jailing youthful
activists. They're in an alliance. They're in an alliance with the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Muslim Brotherhood.
There's no general in the Middle East in the alliance with any Islamist whatsoever.
Well,
generals like the generals of the United States support the status quo in their own self-interest. The last thing in the world they want is the Brotherhood taking control there or anywhere else.
Before I get to David, I want to just give you a chance to explain this. You represent Hamas, whose charter calls for the destruction of Israel. I want to ask you. I mean, why are you so comfortable representing a group whose charter calls for the destruction of an innocent state?
Oh my God! I've actually represented people in the United government.
I didn't ask that. I'm asking you why you represent them.
No, I'm going to answer it. I've also represented people in the United States government that has a foundational document that calls African Americans three-quarter human beings and says women can't vote.
Okay.
It's an ancient document. It's meaningless. We know that Hamas and Israel have been meeting.
Well, the big difference is
the United States has been meeting with Israel.
The big difference
with Hamas and Hezbollah for
if it's so meaningless.
It's all rhetoric, Sean. It's all rhetoric.
David Horowitz, if it was so meaningless, then like the United States, they would make the proper changes and adjustments, but they refuse to do so. And the leaders.
The United States never made adjustments. That document still exists, Sean. The document still exists. African Americans are three-quarter human beings, and women can't vote. That document sits in Washington.
We're talking.
All right, go ahead, David.
A delusional fellow like Stanley Cohen, you get into a surreal world. The reality is that the Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, which is behind both, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Al-Qaeda, have launched a genocidal war against Israel. And this war, by the way, is very old. And and that a second Holocaust is being set up.
Stanley, let him finish.
I didn't interrupt you. The agenda of Hamas in Iran is to push the Jews into the sea, to kill them. There are 50,000 rockets aimed at Israel. What Cohen calls peace, 1 million Israelis have had to seek protection in bomb shelters because of the rockets that are being fired at Israel. To me, it's lunatic that Netanyahu is going to have to convince openly the Israelis to strike Iran. The United States should have struck Iran a while ago.
What's the matter, David? You're running out of wars. First, the United States takes on. First, they take on Afghanistan.
Hey, Stanley, let him. Listen, I'm going to put you both down one at a time. Let him finish.
Don't interrupt me, okay? You're a traitor to this country. You're a traitor to the Jews. You're a Nazi, is what you are, and you are supporting Nazis in the Middle East. That's how I think of you, but I didn't interrupt you. If Iran gets nuclear weapon, Iran has terrorists all over the world. Iran, of course, started the war in 1983 when it blew up. It blew up the Marine barracks in Lebanon.
Oh, I thought that was Hezbollah. Or was it the Arab Brotherhood?
This is a proxy war that is funded by Iran. David, finish your thought.
Hezbollah is Iran. Come on. Hezbollah is Iran. And this happened because Jimmy Carter, the first Obama, unseated the Shah, America's strongest ally in the Middle East.
We've been hearing. Look, David. All right, can I say something, please, Sean? Listen.
And now Obama has done the same with Egypt.
Do you want me just to hang up or just jump up and down and behave like a monkey to be a foil to this guy that never shuts up? Now, at what point can I put some words in this discussion if it's going to be a debate? We've been hearing for months on end the wonderful things about the Arab Spring. We've been hearing about Mubarak being toppled. We've been hearing about Tunisia. We've been hearing about what happened in Libya. We're hearing about what may happen in Syria. It seems to me, just at a time when the region and when we're withdrawing from Iraq and where things seem to be getting, perhaps, although there was a horror story a couple of days ago, better in Afghanistan, it seems to me now that the area is beginning to take control of its own destiny, there are voices of change, things seem to be leveling out, you can always count on the Israelis to raise hell because the Netanyahus of the region fear most of all an Arab unity against which they're going to have to deal. As long as they had their puppet governments in place like Mubarak, as long as they had their friends in the region, everything is fine.
All right, let me jump in here. Hang on a second.
Israel has a history of...
All right, wait, let me add a segment here. What you may view as progress with the Muslim Brotherhood, a terrorist organization taking over, for all of the faults that Mubarak had, the Muslim Brotherhood said prepare for war with Israel during the so-called Arab Spring. Sharia law now is being implemented in Libya. Israel has been, going back to its foundation in 47, 48, Israel has been the victim of offensive attacks from the 67 war to the 73 war to the literally hundreds of thousands of missiles that have been fired into its cities and its pizza parlors and schools. All of these, you have terrorist groups like the one you represent that are dedicated to the destruction of the state of Israel. And this is the problem, David, is that he views the emergence of radical Islamists that have no value for human life and Sharia law, which suppresses the rights of women, as some type of advancement and positive progress.
Precisely. When you're talking to a mouthpiece for America's enemies.
I know. And when we're talking to someone who's paid by the Zionist state. Hey,
David, just let him talk.
I don't want to talk.
One at a time. I'm giving you all a chance.
Yeah,
David.
When you're talking to a mouthpiece for America's enemies, the picture of the world is upside down. Our disgraceful retreat, what Obama has done in Iraq, is to betray all those Americans and all those Iraqis who gave their lives to get rid of Saddam Hussein and to establish
Sean,
in terms
Mr.
of the Middle
Horowitz is
East,
absolutely right.
Somewhat
For Israel,
okay.
Everyone has picked on Israel.
All right, David, hang on a second. Stanley, let him finish, then I will let you go. Go, David.
We're retreating in Iraq before our enemies because Iran is going to fill the vacuum that America leaves. We're retreating in Afghanistan. Obama has betrayed. He betrayed the democratic forces in Iran. He unseated Mubarak, who is an American ally, to open the floodgates for the Muslim Brotherhood. This Stanley sees as peace. And when Netanyahu, in a tiny country surrounded by 300 million Arab Muslims who hate Jews.
I know. Every one of them
Jews.
does. I know, Mr. Horowitz. I know. Everyone hates. I know.
Let me ask you a question.
Everyone hates
Stanley,
Jews. Everyone wants to kill the Jews.
Stanley, let me ask you a question.
To defend itself.
Stanley, let me ask you a question.
Israel wants to defend itself. The enemy sees it as an aggression. But the only aggressor...
Sean, at what point do I get my word in, and does the think tank, who's paid by Israel to put out its propaganda...
He's not paid by Israel.
He's not? Ask him how much money he does for Zionist organizations and Zionist think tanks. You don't? Nonsense. You want to know, Mr. Horowitz?
All right, everybody's mic'd down. This is getting personal. Now, Stanley, I'll go to you and ask you a question. Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Well, I'm going to go back to my fundamental question. You say you keep talking about America. America's... slavery has been overcome. We have an African-American president. We had a civil war that was fought in this country. We had civil rights legislation passed, voting rights legislation. By the way, Republicans helped pass it. And you want to talk about, I don't want to talk about America. I want to ask you about why Hamas still refuses to change its charter in this day and age. They want the destruction. Their charter calls, let me finish. Their charter calls for the destruction of Israel. Why would you align yourself and defend a terrorist organization? They're involved in terror. They always have been. Their charter calls for terror, and you support them. I want to know why.
Sean, keep going.
Why?
Keep going.
Why?
Can I answer the question?
Finally.
I could give two hoots if the charter was changed or revised 500 times tomorrow. It has nothing to do with the relationship which must, and which shall eventually develop in the region. It's words. And when you say, and you gloss over the fact that
words mean something.
That statements as offensive continue as historical documents in the United States. You say it's no big deal.
No, I didn't say it was. I said America's made changes.
Because all it is, you know what, Sean? If you were an African American, I don't believe you would be particularly thrilled with taking your kid to Washington to look at a document that says African Americans are 2/4 or 3/4.
And I would explain to I would explain to. Let me finish. I would explain to my children that America's overcome wrongs and injustices and evil, and America's changed, and I would explain the full context and texture in a civil war that was fought in part over slavery. I would also explain how we developed in the civil rights. I take them to the Martin Luther King monument that was just unveiled there, and I would explain all of those things, and I would explain the history, the difference between let me finish. The difference between the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas, which you represent, is their desire to kill Jews has never stopped. They want a modern-day Holocaust, and you support them, you defend them, and apparently agree with them.
Sean, except for the problem that Hamas and Israel and the United States, whether we like it or not, whether you want to acknowledge it or not, whether Mr. Horowitz wants to be sensitive or not, have been sitting down, engaged in discussions for almost 10 years.
Okay, well,
the fact of the matter,
and
is,
we've gotten nowhere.
The fact of the matter is, you can jump up and down all day long like a puppet, Mr. Horowitz, and scream, "Kill the Arabs, the poor Jews, the poor Zionist state." The reality of it is, the change is coming on the ground.
David gets the last 30 seconds. We're running out of time. David.
This man is such a colossal liar. First of all, Hamas has not been involved in negotiations, period. In fact, it's said that it will not be involved in negotiations. But even the PLO says it will never recognize a Jewish state, and that it wants its Palestine Jew-free. These are Nazis. secondly, just since it's been out so much in this segment, Stanley is illiterate when it comes to the Constitution. The 3/5 clause was a defeat for the slaveholding South. The slave owners wanted a 5/5. They wanted blacks to be counted as 5/5 of a human being, so that they would have that the slave owners would have a greater representation in Congress.
All right, I'm going to have to leave it here, but I appreciate both of you being with us. Thank you.